Vocabulary. Vocabulary is your foundation in languages. If you learn it well, it'll open up an endless amount of opportunities for you as far as your language learning and your language skills go. Why is vocabulary so important, in my opinion? Well, first of all, vocabulary is the building block of communication. Words and phrases, such from reading, writing, speaking, listening, this comes from vocabulary. You use these to get your points across and your ideas across to other people. So vocabulary is very important in that end. So let me ask you a question before we continue. In your opinion, which one is more important? Is it grammar or is it vocabulary? What do you think? Well, vocabulary is the basis of language. How much could you communicate with only grammar and nothing else? If you knew all of the grammatical rules of a language, you learned it from some book or somebody taught you these rules, how much could you communicate? Now, I'm talking about grammar only. You don't know any vocabulary, you don't know anything else, just the grammatical rules. How much could you communicate in the target language? But what about if you only knew words? You didn't know any grammar, you didn't know any rules. All you knew was a list of words, a list of vocabulary. How much could you communicate in that end? So you see, with vocabulary, you can do a lot more. Vocabulary is very important in a language, more so than grammar. Vocabulary is the building block of communication. You could still communicate if you only had vocabulary at your disposal, but it might be incorrect, there might be mistakes, you might break rules, but you're still able to communicate with another person. So vocabulary is very important, and it's something that we have to focus on when we're learning another language. When you learn vocabulary, how do you learn it? How do you choose the words to learn? Do you just get and use any word? Do you search for words that you hear or words that you see somewhere? How do you get vocabulary? It's important for us to have a kind of strategy and system, especially ones that are useful when we're learning vocabulary in another language. And something to consider are the most common words of a language. So how can you begin to build new vocabulary using the most common words? Well, we have something that's called a vocabulary corpus or a frequency list. And basically, to define a corpus, a vocabulary corpus is basically a collection of written or spoken works in a language. For example, books, magazines, newspapers, journals, speeches, interviews, etc. And they contain millions of words of text. So, for example, we have the British National Corpus, and that has over 100 million words of text from modern English. So they've taken collections of all of the written work in modern times, and they've compiled the data, and they see which words are the most frequent or which words are used most commonly. Frequency lists are made from the corpus. A frequency list is basically an ordering of words according to how common they are, from the most common to the least common. So the learning strategy that I'd recommend for you is to learn the most common words first. Learn those first, and as you continue to progress, you'll start to learn more of the least common words. So why should you learn the most common words first? Why is that a better strategy for you? Well, the most common words leads to more frequent exposure. Repeated exposure is important, as we mentioned earlier in the course. You will have a great base to start from too. When you start seeing words over and over and over again, then you'll start to remember them, you'll start to recognize them, and they'll become part of your vocabulary collection. But at the same time, when you know the common words, it becomes easier for you to read and easier for you to listen to people and even easier for you to speak, because now you're using words that are in everyday language. It's not something that's strange or unusual for you. So speaking about language, about how many words do you need? How many words are necessary, or how many words are required for you to communicate or to know a language pretty well? Well, there are estimates about this, and they vary, but currently the estimates say that in general, If you know 250 to 600 words, you're considered to be a functional beginner. And basically, that means that you could go for a weekend trip to a different country and you'd be able to get by more or less easily. If you know 1,000 to 3,000 words, they say that you're at a conversational level at that stage. If you know 4,000 to 10,000 words, then you're considered to be advanced. And then if you know 10,000 plus words, and some people say 10,000 to 15,000 words, then you're considered to be fluent in a language. Now, many learners learn vocabulary according to theme because that's how they've learned in school, or that's what they see in books. So, for example, they may get a book and the book will have vocabulary based on the body parts, or vocabulary based on fruits and vegetables, etc. But let's say you were learning vegetables, right? And one word you might learn is potato. Now, potatoes are good. I don't have any problems against potatoes. They're delicious and they can be used to make many different things. But what number does it show up as in the frequency list? Take a guess. Do you think it's number 10, number 100, number 500? What's the number for potato? Well, when you talk about the most common words, potato is listed right now at number 4,563. So it's not so common, even though English speakers will know potatoes and it's something that we buy and shop for. It's not something that's in common usage. It's not something that's used in everyday language. But let's look at another vegetable. And we have asparagus. Okay. A lot of people like asparagus. But what number is it on the frequency list? It's at 19,992. So if you spent your time learning fruits and vegetables, you'd be learning some words that are far away from what a beginner would come across in reading or listening and things such as that. Whereas if you learned words that are in the first 100 or first 200 or first 300 in the frequency list, you'd be able to at least have general conversation, or you'd be able to function around people who are speaking the language that you're trying to learn. Vocabulary foundation around the most common words first is a very good idea. If you can get a grasp of the most common words, you have a foundation to build off of, and it will make language learning easier for you. When you're learning vocabulary, learning the correct pronunciation of the words is another important aspect of vocabulary. You want to be understood by other people, so the better you can pronounce words, the better it will be for you and for your communication. And I'm not saying that you have to sound like a native speaker, or like I said earlier, that you have to try to trick a local into thinking that you're one of them. But you want to make sure that your pronunciation is clear so that when you're talking, people can understand what you're saying and they'll understand what point you're trying to get across to them. So some different ways to get pronunciation and to work on pronunciation, to hear the language and to practice speaking, is to use YouTube, first of all. YouTube has many tutorials for word pronunciation, and you can listen to these tutorials. You can listen to people pronouncing words or pronouncing words within a sentence, and that can help you with pronunciation. You can practice repeating and recording yourself until your pronunciation is suitable for you, or you can ask a friend to listen to you and see if they can understand you very well, if your pronunciation is clear or if you still need to work on it. But YouTube is a great resource for this. You can also try to use books with vocabulary, and these might have accompanying audio. You can shadow read in order to work on your pronunciation, and later on in our course we'll talk about what shadowing is and what shadow reading is. And the last resort is Google Translate. So you can use Google Translate sometimes. Sometimes it might be useful for new words, but it might not be 100% accurate with the pronunciation. So you have to be careful about this and wary about this. But if you don't have any other choices, it's a good place to start so you can at least hear the pronunciation of a new word and how it sounds, and that can help you to be on your way until you can find something like on YouTube or a friend who can help you with the pronunciation of a new word that you've learned. These can be a bit more expensive, but I think they're quite useful. And these are language dictionaries. And then we also have apps that might be free for your given language. So if you have a language dictionary, an electronic one, then that will have authentic and accurate pronunciation of words, and you can use that to model your pronunciation after. Otherwise, you can look for apps that have a dictionary, and it can be hit or miss. Some of them are wonderful, and then some of them might not be so accurate. But again, if you don't have any other choice, you can work with that, with one of the apps in order to work on your pronunciation skills. Also, when you're trying to learn and build your vocabulary, knowing the script of the language that you're learning is very important. The target language might use a different script than your native language. For example, you might have somebody whose native language is English and they're trying to learn Greek. So in order for them to have more access to the language, it's a good idea for them to learn the script, the Greek script. Likewise, you might have somebody who's a Russian native speaker and they're trying to learn the English language. So it's a good idea for them to learn the English script in order for them to have more access to the language. Why is it a good idea to learn the script of the language? Well, first of all, you'll be able to read more books, you'll be able to read more bulletins and things that are posted in the language that you're trying to learn, in your target language. And on top of that, if you plan to travel later on after you learn the language, then if you know the script of the language, when you go to places like on buses or metro, or you're trying to order from a restaurant's menu, or you're just trying to get around and looking for information, knowing the script will help you to be able to read. A lot of times people rely on transliterations. And in case you don't know, a transliteration basically is when the sounds of a different language are written in the script of your own language so you can know how to pronounce these words. Some people rely on transliterations to learn how to pronounce words, but they're very limiting when you come to think of it. For example, the people that speak that language and the countries that use that language don't use transliterations. So if you go to that country and you try to write with your own script, maybe people won't understand what you're saying. Also, the words and the sounds in your language may be limited. Maybe a certain sound in your target language doesn't exist in your native language. So you're going to end up pronouncing things as you would in your native language, but the target language, your pronunciation of it will be limited and in some cases wrong. So the question basically is, why bother putting the effort into learning the transliteration? Instead, it's better for you to learn the original script, the script of your target language, because even though it might take a little bit longer for you to do so, in the long run, it's going to benefit you greatly. The transliteration is very limiting. So learn the script. Learn the script of your target language, and eventually that will open more doors for you. Now, just a quick note here. Some languages do have a complex script and they have many, many characters. So it might require a lot of time to learn such a language or the script of such a language. In such a case, it might be necessary to take time with that, but not to put so much effort on learning the script in the beginning. Focus on speaking or on listening and things such as that, but don't prohibit yourself from learning the language because it's going to take ages for you to learn the script if the script has a lot of characters to learn. How can you learn new vocabulary? Well, of course, we can work with traditional methods. They do have their uses. Just because they're old or traditional doesn't mean that they're ineffective or that they don't have benefits. There are benefits there. So one traditional method is to use drilling exercises. And this is basically using a notebook or flashcards, writing the words down, and then drilling them, going over them repeatedly until you commit them to memory. You can do this a few minutes a day, every day, with your notebook or with the flashcard. You can quiz yourself when you're drilling with the flashcard and things such as that. So drilling is one way. You can also work with the most common words, which I just mentioned previously. Write these words down on cards or on a notebook and then learn them. So, for example, with the common words, if you use a flashcard, you can write the word in your language, your native language, and then on the back of that card, you can write the meaning in your target language. And then you can drill and practice with them until you get the meaning and you understand the meaning of these words. Do a certain number of words each day, maybe 10, 15, 20, but don't go overboard. And as I said before, don't overwhelm yourself to the point where you're trying to cover 100 words in a day and review them. The important thing is to be consistent and to practice regularly. So if you're only doing 10, 15, 20 words in a day, but you're continuously going over them each day, then that's good enough, at least to start with, until you can build up your ability to drill more words over time. Another traditional method is to take the new words that you hear or see. When you hear or see new words, you write them down and review them over time. Continue to collect the words that you encounter in daily life. So when you're walking, maybe you see a certain word appear a lot of times on shop windows or on taxis or on advertisements. When you're talking to people, maybe there's a word that you hear people saying a lot. When you listen to the radio, maybe again, there's a word or phrase that comes a lot when you hear a radio program or some kind of sports broadcast or anything like that. So you take these words that you hear or see in your daily life and you put them in your notebook or on flashcards and you review them. And as I said before, all of these are good methods. They're traditional, but they're beneficial. And so they can be useful to you. Just because they're old doesn't mean they're not used anymore. And you can always integrate them with new methods as you continue language learning and as you continue building your vocabulary.